Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Deliver Your Agency Mission Faster with cloud.gov. My name is Nikki Williams. I'm a Business Development Manager with AWS GovCloud. And we're very fortunate today to have with us members of the team from GSA 18F's cloud.gov here to share with us a bit more about their very innovative platform as a service solution offering, which is the cloud.gov platform. 18F itself is focused on delivering very user-centric digital services to users of both the government in terms of actual citizens as well as businesses that interact with the government on a daily basis. It's a very innovative group that's really on the leading edge in terms of bringing the best of commercial technologies to government, and this group itself every day is working tirelessly within the cloud.gov office to really make cloud the new normal as it relates to federal agencies. The cloud.gov platform that we're going to learn a bit more about today is actually built on AWS GovCloud. It runs and operates within the region. So in addition to some of the compliance features that Britta and Shashank will talk a bit more about as the session goes on, it also inherits some operational efficiencies of the region, such as isolation as well as U.S. person support. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we have Shashank Khandawal. Shashank is the Director of Cloud.gov in the General Services Administration, working on improving cloud adoption in the federal government. Earlier at 18F, he co-led the digital transformation practice and worked on Every Kid in a Park. Also, Britta Gustafson. Britta is the Deputy Director of Cloud.gov in the General Services Administration with a background in technical writing and open source. Her work has included documentation for the Cloud.gov FedRAMP JAB P-ATO, or Provisional ATO, along with business development for Cloud.gov. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome them to the stage. Thank you.
These teams at 18F, listening to agency needs and working in partnership with agencies, kept running into a few problems. One was that, every time we were building something with an agency, it would be relatively similar on a technical level. Like when you're building a web application, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but the basics are all there every time. But we kept duplicating that work, especially if we're working with an agency's own infrastructure and own software and hardware stack. That was just unnecessary complexity. And that led to a similar and related problem, which, as you all know, the authority to operate process can take months and months, by which time, you're behind the times on what you actually wanted to deliver to the people who needed that service. Especially when you have slightly different systems each time, you have to re-verify all that similar work, do the controls again. That was just not working out very well. And, you want to use cloud to help you with some of this hardware stack problem. But finding really expert cloud operations expertise was not turning out to be easy for our agency partners. You might not already have it in-house. It might be hard to hire for. And even once you find it, it can be really expensive. And an example here with why that was so important was, pretty much every agency has their own cyclical demand cycle. This is just an example of irs.gov. It's got this big spike at the beginning of tax season. It's got another spike at the end of tax season. And throughout the year, the rest of the year, it's a little lower. And in a data center, of course, you have to build capacity to reach those peaks, even if you're not using it the rest of the year. And even when you're working with the cloud, you have to have the operations expertise to really understand how to scale that up and down. Because there's various auto-scaling solutions, but it's never quite magic. You still need that operations expertise. So we're like, all right, we keep hearing this over and over. What can we do about it? This is where we thought, okay, we really need something that will solve all of these problems. This is how cloud.gov got started. The goal is to enable federal agencies to quickly host and update modern web applications without having to duplicate that common infrastructure and security compliance work. And I know when I'm listening to somebody talk about some product that they're working on, it's like, well, how does it actually work? Like, this goal is great. What do you do? So it's an application environment with this platform as a service model, which provides this abstraction layer customized for government on top of the underlying infrastructure as a service provider, which is, in our case, Amazon Web Services GovCloud. And how it really works in practice is you have your code, you and your employees and your contractors with your custom code or your off-the-shelf code. Doesn't matter, you got some code, you gotta put it somewhere. You have self-service tools within cloud.gov that you configure to set up the databases that your web application uses. You set up your database service, you set up your storage service, your CDN, your identity provider, a couple other things you can set up, configure that up. There's sort of a simplified way to do that that gives you the most common options that you might need. And then with one command on the command line, you deploy your application to cloud.gov. And then it's there. That's really all you have to do. You can set up continuous deployment to push it to cloud.gov every time you update your code. And let's say you need to scale it up. Then you add another instance. That's one more command. Cloud.gov will take care of a lot of the underlying technical complexity to make that happen for you. And that's a platform as a service. That exists already. It's a standard model. What we really learned we had to do was build in the federal security compliance all the way up through that platform layer, the application environment layer, which means that when you're building an application on top of cloud.gov, let's say you're building a moderate impact application where there's about 325 security controls that you generally have to deal with. About 269 of them are handled by cloud.gov, which includes inheriting a number of them from the underlying GovCloud infrastructure as a service. This is a huge number of controls that you don't have to deal with. You don't have to necessarily implement them, document them, verify them, re-verify them next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. This will depend on your system. If you have a more complicated system, that's doing something unusual with a number of these controls, if you're integrating a number of different systems and services together, you may have to do shared controls for more of those controls. It really depends on your system. But in general, there are also 41 shared controls where cloud.gov takes care of part of the work, and you have to do some configuration or some additional work. A really good example of that is account management, where cloud.gov gives you a set of roles for your application environment, but you have to make sure you assign them properly to the people in your team with the appropriate levels of permission. That's just not something that we can do for you. We have no idea what your requirements are. And there's about 15 controls that are pretty typical that you have to make sure you manage for yourself. So a simple example of that is making sure that your mobile devices are properly encrypted. Like cloud.gov has nothing to do with that. In a lot of cases, that'll be like a not applicable control. It depends. And the way that we provide this kind of built-in security compliance is through the FedRAMP Joint Authorization Board provisional authority to operate at the moderate impact level. We went through the process with FedRAMP to get the joint agreement from DHS, DoD, GSA, and our third-party auditor to look at all these controls that we say we implement and look at the documentation and look at the technical implementation and make sure they're really actually there so that pretty much any agency can just review that detailed P-ATO documentation and accept it as part of your ATO for your application. And so this gets to really what our goal is with cloud.gov, is shortening time to ATO from months, possibly a year. I've heard of ATOs taking longer than that, to 2 months, to 1 month, to a couple weeks. depending on how familiar your authorizing team is with cloud.gov, depending on what kind of system you have and what kind of ATO you're at. It just takes a whole iceberg, and then you only have to deal with the part on top. So along with a JAB P-ATO at the moderate level, we also have the equivalent for DoD, which is DISA Impact Level 2. So, I mean, I went through the P-ATO process. It's a lot of work. It makes me so excited to just be able to give that work to other agencies so that they don't have to do as much work. And I will hand it off to Shashank to talk about some of the use cases for this.
Oh, I do want my clicker. How's everyone doing? Are you guys excited about cloud.gov? All right, good.
I'm excited.
At the last talk, they didn't let me move around. Here they're letting me move around, which is much nicer. Let's talk about a few use cases for cloud.gov. So the obvious one, of course, is when developing new systems, you can use cloud.gov in the development process to run your dev and your staging environments. And then also, when you're ready for production, put them in production, right? And because deploys to cloud.gov are so easy, one of the things you can hook it up to your CI/CD pipeline, right? And then when you make changes, you can just deploy that code pretty quickly. The second thing is being able to transfer existing systems to the cloud to make them more scalable. This is what Britta was talking about when she was looking at that IRS graph. And you know, by using cloud.gov and generally using the cloud, you don't have to buy that excess server capacity in your data center, right? So that really helps reduce costs. And then in terms of scaling with cloud.gov, it's literally a one-line command to increase your number of instances of your application or decrease your number of instances as you scale up and down. And then the third use case for cloud.gov is something that I particularly like. It's the ability to prototype. And what cloud.gov does is we can sell you like a prototyping account. And we sell one per agency, and it's very cheap, and I'll talk about pricing later. And then different teams within the agency can sort of experiment with cloud.gov and get experience with using a PaaS. And as those small experiments and prototypes are run, and eventually when they're ready to be graduated into production, you could buy a production account. So cloud.gov is a platform as a service, right? It's got Cloud Foundry under the hood. And what this makes it ideal for is modern web applications, so typically things that have been written in the last 5 to 7 years. And one of the things about PaaS architecture in general and cloud.gov in particular is that applications need to be stateless. And what that means is you need to store your data in services rather than relying on the local file system. And what this means is, instead of storing state in text files on your disk, you might store that state in your database, or if you're storing files somewhere for something, you would do that in S3 versus doing that on your local disk, right? And what that allows is by eliminating the dependence on your local file system, you're making your service scalable, right? So when you launch multiple instances, they just hit the services, and so then multiple instances can share requests. In terms of programming languages, we support Ruby, Node.js, Python, Java, and if you're on the very cutting edge, Go. And PHP isn't on the list, but we also support PHP. And then we support associated frameworks with those languages, such as Drupal, WordPress, Rails, or Django. And then, if there's something that your agency is using that isn't on this list, Brad and I would love to come talk to you about it and figure out if that's something we can support on cloud.gov. So what kind of team do you need? I think we get this question sometimes, right? And so if you're working with cloud.gov, you need a team that can build and maintain modern web applications. that can install and use command line tools. We are working on cloud.gov's dashboard so that some user management features can be done through a web UI, but a lot of the application launching and scaling is still done through the command line. And then, of course, be responsible for security and operations and maintenance of your application, right? And so the difference here is that you're not running your own infrastructure, but you're still, and that's our responsibility, right? So anything on the platform and below that infrastructure, that's cloud.gov's responsibility. In terms of as a customer, your application's your responsibility, right? And I think Britta and I were in a previous talk where they were talking about how with cloud environments, the line of responsibility gets pretty fuzzy. It's pretty clear with cloud.gov, and we've got some extensive documentation on our website that talks more about what exactly your particular responsibilities are. And that makes it very easy for you to plan and do operations with cloud.gov. These are our current customers, and as you can see, there are various different sizes, and they run different applications. I'm going to talk about a few of them. One of the newest ones on cloud.gov is the Federal Election Commission's website. That's fec.gov, and they're running their main website in cloud.gov. What they did was they hired an 18F team to help them develop a new version of their website, and that's now hosted on cloud.gov. And the nice thing there is they actually figured out how much money they save by using cloud.gov and in general by using cloud services. And they save $1.2 million a year. And that's the difference in cost between running the website in their data center versus running it on our PaaS. And that's a decent chunk of money, right? The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation runs their website, fdic.gov, also on cloud.gov. That was actually the first agency to run their main agency website. And I mentioned them because they didn't hire an 18F or a USDS team to do it. They just did it with their developers and their contractor. We maybe exchanged a few phone calls and emails with them, but that was about the extent of the support they needed. And they had it pretty easy because they had a website that was already running on AWS, right, Britta? No? Oh, maybe not. But they had an easy time switching over. And my favorite website runs on cloud.gov as well. Is from the Department of Interior. It's called everykidinapark.gov. It's my favorite website because I was involved in the making of it. But it's also a cool program to bring fourth graders to the park. And that one's an interesting story because there was basically 2 developers on the team, myself and a front-end developer, and we had 3 months to build it. And the only way we could make it work was to actually deploy it in cloud.gov, and this was when cloud.gov was in its infancy. And the cloud.gov team at the time had just sort of started up accepting applications to be run in production on there. And we ended up taking advantage on the Every Kid in the Park team about it because we didn't have the time or the expertise to be able to run and secure our own infrastructure in 3 months. So we completely benefited from the compliance. Every Kid in the Park 2 years later still runs on cloud.gov and sort of requires minimal maintenance. Oh yeah, I talked about FEC. And there's a decent amount of cost savings there. It's a pretty data-heavy website. If you haven't checked it out, it's actually a really nice website. And I think the team that worked on it did a really good job with it. One of the things we hear a lot when we go out and talk to agencies is agencies are very concerned about vendor lock-in. And so there's a couple aspects to this that cloud.gov helps with, right? One, cloud.gov itself is based on the open source Cloud Foundry platform, which means that an application that runs on cloud.gov will also work with an industry Cloud Foundry provider, and there are some examples below, like SAP, Pivotal, or IBM, and vice versa, right? If it runs on those platforms, you can come and run your application on cloud.gov. And then cloud.gov itself is also open source. So if an agency actually wants to run their own instance of cloud.gov, that's something they can do. And we haven't had that happen yet, but I think we'd be pretty excited if someone did that. And then the other part of vendor lock-in is a lot of agencies are very concerned about being platform agnostic. So they don't necessarily want to be tied into Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud. And so one of the things we're working with further down the line is having cloud.gov run on different infrastructure platforms as well. And that'll be, so from a agency or a developer perspective, you're running your application on the PaaS, and you're less concerned about what infrastructure providers under the hood, unless you start hooking up into other services and stuff. Pricing. Cloud.gov is cheap. Well, I think it's cheap. So cloud.gov packages run typically from 11,000 to 110,000 per system per year. That depends on what type of system you're running. So if you're running a FSMA low system, for example, it's a certain price. If you're running a FSMA moderate system, it's a slightly higher price. And then there's the two components are sort of the access fee, which is on the left, and then an estimated resource usage charge. And there's some examples here from simple websites only cost like $1,000, $5,000 a year in research fees. A complex website might cost like $10,000 to $20,000 a year. And so for an agency, here's sort of an example purchase. This is the sort of configuration we sell a lot, where an agency will buy one prototyping package so that they can run lots of little experiments. That's a $15,000 access fee, and then typically they estimate $5,000 or $7,000 in estimated usage. And then as their systems get ready, they might buy a FSMA low system or FSMA moderate system to run like their public dynamic, like a public web app. And then in that package, they can run their dev, staging, and production environments, right? So it's one package for all the environments, and that's, let's say, a $20,000 access fee and $10,000 of estimated usage. An agency typically would spend $50,000 or so per year with cloud.gov. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how cloud.gov helps vendors. This is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and a lot of time working to enable. One of the ways is that it allows vendors to get easy access to a modern self-service environment. I know from working with lots of different agencies across the federal government that the infrastructure is, one, vastly different between agencies, but also sometimes not exactly where you might want it to be. And so, vendors can work with partner agencies that can purchase access to cloud.gov. It's a simple 4-week paperwork process, and then that gives you that modern platform, right? And that means that you can sort of be faster in terms of deploying your application for the agency, and the agency is also happy, right? Because they get their code a little bit faster. And the second way is like enabling teams to use cloud.gov as a way to build their SaaS products on as well, right? So we've had at least one vendor that is configuring their product. They're working with GSA to configure their product to run on cloud.gov, and they're super excited because the next agency they sell that product to, they can just say, hey, it already runs on cloud.gov, and it's already configured, so that'll be an easier sale for them. And then the final is, because we handle a lot of that infrastructure and compliance stuff, that means that you can deploy a smaller team to an agency, and you don't have to deploy a lot of that compliance and infrastructure staff that you normally would. Agencies get access to cloud.gov pretty easily. It's a 4-week paperwork process through an interagency agreement. And what the IA processes, it's a set of forms that go back and forth. Once it's set up, it's very quick on our end to set you up with an account. And what we typically do is we sign agencies up for 12-month agreements. We've done some shorter ones, and I think maybe we've got a longer one or two, but 12 months seems to be about what agencies sign up for. And then one nice thing to note is we can definitely cross fiscal year boundaries if the color of your money's right. So, what we love to hear from people. So email us with your questions, or if you actually want to buy cloud.gov. One of the nice things we do is we provide sandbox spaces, which are small sort of limited accounts, but they let you play with cloud.gov. And if you have a federal government email address, you can sort of sign yourself up for a sandbox account, and that'll let you deploy some test applications and get a feel for what it is to use cloud.gov. And that's really all that Britta and I wanted to sort of formally talk about. We'd love to take the rest of the time to answer any questions you guys have. And we're around here to talk, and we'll be around for chunks of the day later as well.
All right.
You mentioned that for the DoD accreditation process that you accomplished the level 2 data. Do you have plans or any works for moving up to the level 4, level 5 data?
I will.
You should repeat the question.
Yeah, I will repeat your question, and I will answer it. So the question is, we mentioned that we have the DISA Impact Level 2 provisional authorization. Do we have plans to look at 4 and 6 and additional levels? Yes, I would love to do that. I've heard from many DoD folks that there's a little bit at level 2, but really the bulk of the work is level 4 and above. So one of the things that we're looking at is also, we only have FedRAMP moderate on the sort of civilian side, which takes care of a lot of applications, but there are still some that are FedRAMP high. So that is in our sort of longer term roadmap is FedRAMP high. And then FedRAMP high is relatively close to impact level 4. So that's in the plans. We're hoping to. Thank you. Let's see. Other folks have questions? Yes, gentleman in the white.
I have a question about the IA agreements that are required for federal departments to secure this service. There are 3 requirements. Maybe you can speak a little bit to them. And the first one is that the service can be obtained conveniently or economically, or it cannot be in the public space or private space. Excuse me. My apologies. That we don't have the expertise within our department to develop a solution ourselves. Can you speak to how you get around the private offering component for federal agencies?
Yeah. So the question is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, so when you're doing an interagency agreement process, there are a few criteria that you have to certify for why you're doing the interagency agreement. And one is checking off the box that says this is more economically and efficiently attained through the interagency agreement than doing a commercial service. And the second one is, what's the second one? And there's the third one.
You don't have the expertise in-house.
You don't have the expertise in-house. Yeah, so this is really up to the agency that's purchasing it to make that evaluation. Like, we want people to choose the solution that is right for them because, cloud.gov does offer something for the agencies that we're working with that they have not been able to find as efficiently or economically in the private sector. So if that is the answer to your question, that you have to look at those very seriously and see if there is an option that is better.
I guess maybe
So there's, as far as I know, there's currently no platform as a service offering that's FedRAMP authorized right now.
There are some that don't offer the equivalent feature set, yeah.
Yeah.
So my question on topic is do you have to satisfy all three, or do you have to just satisfy one of the three to be able to use your service?
No, in the interagency agreement process, you have to go through all three.
You have to satisfy all three.
Yep.
Yeah, that's just like a standard part of the forms. Like, for example, we also, as a service, are working on using some of the shared services from other agencies, and we also have to do that evaluation before we use the shared services from other agencies to the interagency agreement process. It's just a standard set of forms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we've seen that most agencies are pretty familiar with the forms.
I can barely see you, but all the way in the back.
You had a slide that kind of dealt with this, but I guess I had a question about the tooling available on the platform. So I saw you mentioned programming languages, and then you also kind of covered, I guess, web application frameworks. Is that what it's called? So I'm wondering, like, in the case of Java, if we could deploy a web application, we need the application server level. So is that something that's, like Tomcat, for instance, with Java, is that something that's provided on the platform, like Express or Node.js?
Yeah, let me make sure I try to rephrase your question accurately. It's a challenge, I got it. So, we provide this support for these programming languages. Does that also include support for some of the associated sort of frameworks and packages, such as Tomcat in the case of Java, or Express in the case of Node.js? Yeah? All right. So yeah, so so when you get, let's see, I'm going to try to answer this without getting way too deep in the technical weeds way too quickly, because that's something I can do. If you want that, I can do that. So yeah, so the Java support does include like the sort of ordinary, straightforward like Tomcat support and other frameworks that are pretty common for doing Java applications, yeah.
You can also run, so the way cloud.gov runs is the Cloud Foundry system is based on build packs. There's a build pack for Java that apparently includes Tomcat.
Yeah.
And then if there's something you want to use that isn't supported out of the box with cloud.gov, you can run your custom build pack on there as well. What happens in that case is I think you have to be responsible for a few more of those security controls because you're now running a build pack that isn't within our boundary.
Yeah, so for example, if you're using the built-in Java support, you will get those Java updates. Like we will keep that Java like up to date and fully security patched for you. If you are using R, for example, which is not one of the built-in languages, you have to make sure that you're updating R, according to your own security needs.
In terms of that kind of patching, how do you coordinate testing potentially
On the customer application? Yeah, okay, so the question is, so we're updating these frameworks kind of under the hood. How do we make sure that there's not a customer impact? If we update something, for example, that it doesn't randomly break your application that's running. So this is another one where I could start talking about build packs and restaging really quickly. So let's see. When you just have an application running that won't pick up the new language automatically midstream while it's running, you have to restage your application or restart your application to pick up that language update. So that's part of it. And so we recommend also that you read our release notes, which we publish about every 2 weeks, where we say we've updated our build packs to this version. You might want to restart your application to pick up that update. And you also might want to read the release notes on that build pack update to look for any potential issues.
And it's very easy to do zero downtime deploys on cloud.gov.
So this is a good question. I love talking about this question. So do we have different environments, dev, staging, and prod? So what we recommend is that within your package of cloud.gov access that you've purchased, it's very easy to set up different environments for dev, staging, and prod, or as many environments as you want. And we recommend that you do that, and then test your applications there. And there's like,
roll your patches to staging first, or you testing can be coordinated, or how does it's basically just kind of all at once, or how do you?
yeah, we update the build packs all at once. Yeah.
So it's great that this capability is now available to government agencies for all the reasons you stated. What about the ability to do as a service for these agencies that are using your cloud.gov? For example, backup as a service, DR as a service, testing as a service. Is there a mechanism in your cloud.gov to offer that, like a marketplace, or is there?
So let me repeat your question first. There's not yet, but soon. So the question is, you have a lot of different services in the marketplace, in the just general marketplace in the world, for testing as a service, DR as a service, other services that your government web application needs. So we do not yet have a way for folks to hook into that, but that's our dream. So right now, you can see, for example, on the services list, that there's a few services that we provide in-house, like Redis. And we sort of reach under the hood through to Amazon Web Services for things like S3. What we really want to do is also be able to integrate with other infrastructure providers, service providers, to reach under the hood to offer a lot more services. And the way that you would do that, if you're interested in doing that as a vendor, is there's this thing called a Cloud Foundry broker, which is a relatively straightforward piece of code that allows us to do that kind of integration. And the thing that we haven't yet developed is how exactly, sort of on a procurement level, we arrange that with the partner companies. Yep. And we also haven't quite sorted out how we do the cost recovery to make sure that all of what the customer is spending on that service is passed through correctly.
So one of the things we're working on within the next quarter will actually be brokering Amazon Web Services, so that if you want to use a service that we currently don't have brokered, you can actually pass through and use an Amazon account, run your own service, at which point you're responsible for running your own instance of whatever it is. And so then in that process, we'll figure out how to do some of the billing stuff and how to make that work with procurement.
Yeah, we got some more research to do on it, but that's the dream. Thank you. It's a good question. Yes.
Can you drill a little bit more into the controls and how that works? Obviously there's shared controls and stuff like that. So how does that work? What should people expect to have to be in the essence to be able to attach to this service?
Yeah, yes. Sorry, I keep answering all the questions.
No, go for it.
I love the compliance questions. That's my thing. So the question is, can we go into a little more detail about these controls that cloud.gov handles and how the shared controls work, and what sort of things you might inherit and what sort of things you might still have to implement? So the things that you definitely still have to take care of are the operational controls for the application level things. So for example, you're still going to have to, build a POAM for your application to work with your security folks on that. You still have to, make sure that you're assigning your users by the principle of least privilege. You still have to make sure that your incident response process is what your agency needs for incident response and contingency planning. But then, for a lot of, for example, the contingency planning controls, you can say, well, we've configured cloud.gov to be resilient using the resiliency that they've built in. We've configured our services there to do backups for us using S3, which inherits the pretty good SLA from Amazon. Or for example, oh man, tell me a family and I'll tell you how we handle it.
Like you mentioned incident response, is there SOC coordination, or how is that handled?
So for incident response.
So repeat the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the thing is, because to me, this is like
All right, let me rephrase your question. So with, for example, incident response, how does it help with that? Because this is hard and it takes a lot of work. So like what, in more detail, really is the value that cloud.gov is bringing for something like that? I think incident response is a little bit of a trickier family to work with in terms of explaining that, because it is such an operational type of set of controls. But for example, let's say logging. Logging is one of those things that is relevant to a whole series of families of controls. Like basically, I don't know, a good third of them have something to do with logging and monitoring. Cloud.gov has built-in logging for your application. Like you don't have to build your own logging system that you are sure has enough logs on a basic level for most kinds of government compliance. Like we got that for you. And but you still have to, for example, have a procedure and make sure that you know, okay, so let's say, for example, you have a security incident and somebody takes over your cloud.gov account and you don't have access to it anymore. You still have to make sure that in your procedures, you have the contact information for cloud.gov so you can reach out to us and then we can, go through a process of verifying your identity and figuring out how to get you the credentials back and, helping you recover from that incident. Like, my dream also is to have some templates for those kinds of procedures written for customers, because pretty much everyone is going to have to do that. I don't have those templates written yet, but I'm working on it.
And so also with incident response, it's one of those things that if the incident is with your application, you're primarily responsible for it. If the incident is with cloud.gov, then we're responsible for it. And often, in most cases, it's pretty obvious where it is. And if it's not, then our teams will get involved and we can help figure out where that incident is.
Yeah, and that's also one of the things about the P-ATO documentation that was actually really helpful as we worked with Ajab and our auditor on that we had to write out the responsibility in a fairly detailed way in that documentation. So if you want the whole 400 pages, I can help you find that. You just request it from FedRAMP. It's really easy.
I have one more question. So you know in like AWS you have the ability to have regions and availability zones. So we have applications running in a region and we're running in zone A, and God forbid it goes down, we have the ability to bring everything back up in availability zone B. Is there something similar to that in your offering?
So the way, this is really interesting. Okay, so the question is, sorry, let me rephrase. When you're working with like an infrastructure as a service provider, you will have your information in a region and you'll have it in multiple availability zones, so that if one availability zone has a problem, it's available in the other one, which is really, really helpful for all kinds of contingency planning controls. So cloud.gov provides this abstraction layer on top of that infrastructure layer. So we're handling that availability zone sort of spread for you. So you just have to kind of have your application there. You still need to make sure that you're configuring, for example, multiple instances of your application. Because under the hood, you might have, if you only had one instance of your application running on cloud.gov, that might be affected by an availability zone problem. But if you have like a couple instances, they're going to be spread out automatically a little better. So this is something that, when you get cloud.gov, or even when you just read the documentation on the website, we have a series of best practices that we recommend. And it, for example, recommends very clearly, like, don't just run one instance of your application.
And then when Amazon Web Services GovCloud East comes online, we'll probably be the first in line to practice our deploys into the East region as well. 2018 is the timeline for the East region.
Yeah, let's see.
So that's not that far away.
Let's see.
Not at all. In government time, it's next week.
This is kind of a two-part. Could you walk me through just at a very high level, the fork process for your cloud.gov platform, and then also does that come with the inherent security controls?
Oh, this is a wonderful question. So, the question is, can you walk us through the fork process of cloud.gov, which I'm understanding as what if you wanted to run your own cloud.gov instance or environment? And if so, would that inherit also the kind of compliance work that we've done? So the first thing you would do is reach out to us as a team, because we don't yet have all of the code is available, but you'd kind of have to like comb around all the different repositories, and it's much easier just to email us and say like, hey, we really want to set up, you know, a version of this in our agency, and we'd start talking to you about it and learn more about what you need. You know, we'd ask you some questions about, you know, stuff, and then we'd give you sort of an organized version of the code you need. And so that would inherit all of the work that we've done on like building a system that can comply with all of these controls. And so what we would also do in that case, like you wouldn't have necessarily the documentation associated with it, and you wouldn't inherit automatically the Joint Authorization Board P-ATO, because a big chunk of the P-ATO is the operational controls that we've documented and implemented in our team processes and so on.
But you will inherit, because a lot of what we do is infrastructure as code and configuration in code and configuration management. So all of those pieces of the controls, you will definitely inherit in the sense of acquiring the ability to do that. But like Britta says, right, some of those controls are more operational in nature, and that's something you'd have to work out with the agency and as part of your SSP, right?
Yeah, and so what we would do in that case, I'm just waiting for somebody to ask me this, so y'all should send us that email. We would give you like the policies and procedures that we've developed and say like, hey, here's a starting point. And then also our plan is to give as much as we possibly can of our system security plan and our other P-ATO documents to that team to reuse and adapt. We have a long-standing dream of actually publishing a big chunk of our SSP just even publicly, because some of it's sensitive, but you know, a pretty good chunk of the SSP is just kind of procedural stuff. It's pretty straightforward. There's no reason it really has to be non-public. So yeah, talk to us. And also, if anyone also is working on something like a platform as a service, and you just want to see our SSP for reference, and you don't, like you can just request it from FedRAMP, or you can just email us and like be like, oh man, you know, we are working on, you know, doing some cloud deployment with some containers, like how do you handle it? And I will always, my team and I will always answer that email and be like, all right, let me tell you what we learned. Like, we don't want to keep it to ourselves. Like, our whole goal here is to make government IT better. We don't have any incentive to keep it on our team. So, thanks for asking.
Do you have ways of integrating with like back-end monitoring, logging, that sort of stuff? I'm sure most of these agencies have other things that you have to integrate with.
Yes. So the question is, also I have like 7 seconds left, so I'll answer it real quick. Do we have ways of integrating with back-end monitoring and other things? Yes, especially if that thing has an API. You can connect to any kind of API you want from your application. And there's a couple more features we need to build in to make it really easy to build like a log drain to, let's say you have Splunk or something running, to make it really easy to drain your logs to Splunk as well. But yeah, in that case, pretty much what you do is you email us. We should go back to our email slide to bring our email back up.
Yep.
We also have little, one-pagers that y'all can come up and we can hand you it. Talk to us.
Yeah, so we're actually out of time, but Britta and I are here to answer any questions you guys have, and we're generally around in the conference as well.
Yes.
So thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Y'all.